make this dance happen.
These people are going to a party. But it's no ordinary party. Gatherings like these are called blues parties. The trouble is, just about every aspect of these parties breaks the law. The party organisers charge for drinks, but since the premises aren't licensed, they're breaking the licensing laws. Many of the people at blues parties smoke dope, and of course that's against the law. And clashes with the police aren't the only problem. Because the parties are held in residential areas, there are often complaints from neighbours about the noise. As a result, council officers tour the streets in unmarked cars, measuring the noise from parties on sound detecting equipment. Party organisers are fined hundreds of pounds under the 1974 Control of Pollution Act, but it doesn't stop them.
Quite a few people have been into court and they've been fined 40, 50, 100 pounds. And I've seen those people, and those same people, they've kept parties again at their own houses, you know, and flats. You know, so that goes to show that it will continue. No matter how much pressure they put on them, they will continue.
To keep ahead of the law, the organisers must constantly change the location of the parties. But this has come to involve some party organisers in even more serious offences, this time breaking and entering. Council estates like this one in West London are typical of the kind of places organisers choose, because they're full of empty, hard-to-let flats. The organisers may hear from friends living on the estate that a flat like this one has been empty for some weeks. All they need to do is to move a sound system into the living room, set up a drinks counter, and the place is ready. The next morning they move everything out again, so by the time neighbours complain, if they do, there's no way of knowing that a party actually took place, and no way of tracing who organised it. The other alternative is boarded up houses under compulsory purchase order awaiting demolition. They're known as capture houses.
You might find a few blues parties that goes on in sort of what they call captured houses, you know? I mean, these are houses, you know, not occupied by no one at all. So, you know, if someone can sort of get sort of quick access to that house, you know, they would move in and have a blues as a mean of having a leisurable function. Sadly, you know, you get the most deplorable conditions. I mean, they could be floorboards torn up and great filthy walls and so on. And the amazing thing is you get people dressing up like, I mean, Hollywood stars coming to blues dance, you know? And I mean, when they come out, I mean, they could be looking as if they've been sort of working on a building site. Because, I mean, there's no way you're going to brush against a wall and don't expect to side your clothes and so on. But yet they still come.
More and more blues parties like this one are springing up all over London, bringing young West Indians more often into conflict with the law. They're particularly worrying because they seem to be the result of a cultural clash between one section of black youth and white society. That clash was at least partly responsible for the rioting in Bristol last month. And today's growth of blues parties is evidence that the clash is getting more serious all the time. The tradition of blues parties began back in the West Indies, principally in Jamaica in the 1950s.
With the advent of amplified sound systems and the access to the American blues music scene, blues dances came into their own. People would move away from the established clubs and lawn dances set up to having parties in their own homes, you know, in their houses.
When West Indians came to Britain, not surprisingly, they wanted to bring that tradition of blues parties with them. Count Suckle was one of the first DJs or soundmen to organise such functions in London.
Well, I actually started the blues party myself in the 50s. Me and another fella named Duke Vinn and a guy named Clarence.
From coast to coast, the sound of now.
We'd come with 2 speakers and with little 45 records in the hand, and we make the best of your wedding and your birthday, anything in your house, and we enjoy it. You'd get about 50 blues dance in the basement, Battersea, Stoke Newton. You'd find one in Ladbroke Grove. You'd find 3. I remember you could go on Summer Leighton Road on a Saturday night and find 8 blues dance on each side of the street.
From the start, there were problems. The open-air blues dances of the West Indies, where people had the space to let off steam, didn't translate easily to London's residential streets.
In the West Indies, we had what we had, but in England, we came into something that somebody else had. The structure of the houses are different, and this, neighbor-to-neighbor relationships are quite different. In the West Indies, the local average parties would be outmirrored, or sometimes in houses, but then you'd have access to the yards and that sort of thing. But in England, the parties were strictly home-based, very little access to open yards.
There's nowhere like for them to go and enjoy themselves, so they got to stay down to the basement and move out their furniture and dance in 1 room and 2 rooms and make the blues party to enjoy themselves, because you couldn't get a town hall in those days to rent, or a church hall or nothing. You just wouldn't get no, so you got to keep it into your house. So it was bad.
During the 50s and early 60s, though, blues parties were still light-hearted affairs. Though the organisers broke the law even then by unlicensed selling of drinks in private houses, they were discreet enough to avoid conflict with neighbours and police raids. The mood of the parties was reflected in the music played by DJs or soundmen, upbeat music called ska. Millie had a #1 hit with My Boy Lollipop in 1964. By the late 60s, the mood had begun to change. The change began in Jamaica and was reflected in the music coming from there. Ska was replaced by rocksteady. The lyrics began to reflect the hardship and frustration experienced by the younger generation in the shanty towns of Jamaica.
Get up in the morning, say, big and far and fly, but not no every month can be.
As the mood got more and more somber, rocksteady gave way to reggae, a music of open protest.
You're gonna light me up yourself, and don't say no. You got to light me up yourself, I said so. Hear what you gonna do, you rock so, like you never did before. It's so you did so.
This was a message that Britain's young second-generation blacks could easily identify with, since by now many were emerging from school with no jobs to go to, and a feeling that white society had rejected them.
What you got? But I don't know. I'm not trying to wonder why you act so.
Reggae changed the whole character of Saturday night blues dances. And this is really where the problems began, because reggae was bound up with smoking marijuana or ganja and with Rastafarianism, a fast-growing religious movement among young British-born blacks.
We don't recognize that there should be any penal laws relating to ganja, because ganja is a natural plant made by God Almighty himself. It's not man-made. But yet, the Europeans don't penalize people for drinking alcohol, which is very damaging and dangerous to the biological structure. And, you know, the whole thing is hypocritical and ungodly, I would say.
Not all drug takers were true Rastafarians. Some merely adopted the Rasta locks because they liked dope, or because it was a way of challenging white society.
Yeah, that is a problem. We would call them wolves in sheep clothing. But that is a problem we've got to live with. Because some people try to turn Rasta into a fad, into fashion. Well, this is partly due to the fact that Rasta is very unstructured and not institutionalized and that sort of thing. So that, you know, it's reasonably difficult to know when you have a Rasta from when you don't.
Dope smoking was illegal too in the West Indies, but the authorities clamped down harder on the suppliers than the users. In London, the police pursued both with equal zeal. The dope smoking and the general mood of frustration, on top of the noise and illicit drinking, had made blues parties a pretty unattractive night out. What kind of things used to happen?
Well, you go to the blues and you go up the counter, you buy a drink, they charge you more than the cost for the drink. You might ask for your change. They say there's no change. A man try to steal you at the same time. Outside on the pavement. Everybody standing up outside, making a war. War inside, war outside. Law comes in. Everybody just get nicked to what you don't even know about.
About this time, an alternative to the blues party scene began to establish itself. The soundmen of the 50s had made enough money from organising parties to launch into business with their own nightclubs, especially for black people. The first of these in central London was the Q Club in Paddington, opened by Count Suckle in 1964.
I opened the Q Club in '64. There wasn't much black clubs. And then by 70, 71, then the clubs really start to expand.
Did the clubs attract the people away from the blues parties?
Yes, it did, yes. Because it was more as a thing, even though you like the blues, but the club was a more thing where it's more you can dress up to what you want and take a girl out, you know. I look the part in a club as you'd be. When the blues, you couldn't really dress up because in 2 rooms everybody's sweating and, you know, it was like chaos, you know.
The blues party scene faded, and for a while, it looked as if the legal, properly licensed club scene would replace it. But it was already too late for that. The young blacks by now felt too hostile to white society to want to abide by its rules and regulations in clubland.
When they come to the club, they don't go into the club to enjoy themselves. They rather gather outside and create a nuisance to the residents in the area. The next problem that I find is on leaving the club. Rather than leave straight away from the club, they go outside again and congregate, shouting at each other across the door, revving their cars, slamming the car doors, and even playing football with beer cans. I mean, this is disturbing to a person within the neighborhood that is sleeping. And I mean, these are the sort of things that the neighbors has got to make report to the police about.
The build-up of hostility between the police and black clubgoers led in 1974 to one of the most serious clashes in the history of clubland. The incident happened here in Cricklewood Broadway at the Carib Club.
Some fella ran from a car to the club, and the police came in to see if they could find this fellow because there was something wrong about it. They just rushed through the crowd. On doing so, they went to the toilet, found the chap, and started pulling him out. The rest of the crowd started shouting, which is a normal thing in any crowd. They're shouting that they should leave the chap alone. And while shouting, the young police, he got nervous. And as a young police, the first thing he's going to do is reach for his baton. Now, after this, anyone that comes near him, surely he's going to use it because he's thinking of wanting to protect himself. And the first one he hit, then the crowd is going to get hostile. And in my opinion, this is exactly what happened.
Of the 12 youths convicted of making an affray and fighting, 10 were acquitted. The club closed after this incident, and it wasn't the only one to see this kind of trouble. The lesson black club owners learnt from the Carib trial was that if they wanted to stay open, they had to impose much tougher rules and regulations on young reggae fans, or keep them out altogether. That's exactly what Frank Irving did when he opened his new club, the Palm Tree, 3 years ago.
Well, we start our age group from about age 21 upwards. I'm sorry to say we do not take anybody under 21 unless we don't know. Because you could say some people who's 21, who's 19, look like 21. So we accept that they are 21 if they look like 21 to us.
What is it about the younger crowd coming to your club that you can't really deal with? What is it about them that forces you to say, well, I'm sorry, you can't come in?
Well, most of them have this religious tag on them, you know, like Rasta movement and the jug scene and the hat and things, which I don't like. So because I don't like it, I don't accept it.
Soon, there were very few black-owned clubs at all who would let in reggae soundmen like Lloyd Coxon and his young followers.
They didn't want any Rasta, no Rastafarians in their clubs. And we wouldn't take some of the jobs because of that. Some of the clubs, I know our Rastafarian brethren come to the door to pay. They say they wouldn't have them. And we did exactly the same. We wouldn't play, we just string up our sound, put it back into our van and we go back home, you know. You see. So there was very little clubs that would take us as sound system and our music.
The club scene for young blacks might have died at this point were it not for the intervention of white club owners. They saw the young reggae fans virtually barred from black-owned clubs, so they started to cater for them. Clubs like Colombo's in the West End hired soundmen to attract the young reggae crowd.
Well, it's mainly a coloured crowd, and it's ordinary coloured people and a large selection of Rastafarians.
Are the Rasta youngsters who go to Colombo's usually allowed into other clubs in the West End?
Well, I don't think there's any other clubs in the West End that cater for them. I don't think there is a club that would let them in.
But clubs like Colombo's have become a source of even more frequent conflict between the police and young reggae fans, because they're in the West End, an area of heavier policing than other parts of London.
Well, I think the West End's a very peculiar area. In a relatively small section of London, you've got a high concentration of illegal and semi-illegal activities. You've got a lot of illegal gaming clubs, you've got a lot of strip clubs, you've got a lot of drinking clubs, you've got a lot of prostitution, some of which is organised, some of which isn't, all packed into a relatively small part of town. Now, most of that is run by a variety of ethnic groups. Maltese, Italians, Cypriots, Greeks, Chinese, a whole cross-section of people. And it's a very turbulent area. You've also got a lot of drugs in the area as well. Now, that sort of concentration of activity has always made for a great concentration of police activity. West End Central, which is the main police station covering the area, is said to be the busiest police station in the country in terms of the number of incidents they have reported to them. If there is a general police presence in the area, which is increasing, and if there is a general push against clubs on the fringes of legality, some of them will of course be perfectly legal, some of them won't, then the black clubs are going to get swept up as well.
And that's exactly what has happened. Colombo has been frequently raided.
Oh, we face a mountain of problems here, and they'll come from the police.
What are they?
The harassment of people coming and going from the club, harassment of the management, the constant coming in the club, just disrupting the dances. The police are always about in Carnaby Street. I mean, they just don't leave the people alone.
With so few clubs prepared to admit young reggae fans, those that did were constantly overcrowded. noise continued to be a problem, and the crowded conditions often led to fights. Now, things have got so bad that clubs, whether white-owned or black-owned, have simply begun to close down. Last time I was here with the film crew, 8 months ago, this was the site of one of North London's most popular black clubs. The Club Norique in Tottenham was packed out several nights a week. Last October, it closed. In Norique's case, it was a compulsory purchase order from the council that closed it. But trouble had been so frequent that people in the borough say it would only have been a matter of time before it closed anyway. The Nutmeg in Ealing closed after an SPG raid and allegations of after-hours drinking. Charlie Brown's in Tottenham, where fights were frequent, was closed down by its new management. Clouds in Brixton had its new licence cut back and had to close because of financial problems. Now, Colombo in Carnaby Street is threatened with closure too. Have you had any difficulties with your licence lately?
Yeah, we've had difficulties with all of our licences, renewing them. Well, yeah, all of them. They just want to close the club up.
Everyone seems so certain that black clubs mean trouble that even those clubs with a previously good reputation, like the Q Club in Paddington, are finding their licences opposed.
Well, I am really, I would say, astonished about me losing my license with the police, because I've been here from 1964, 17 years, and I've never had no trouble with the police. I've never had no fight in my clubs. They've never arrested any one of my members for weed, drugs, rape, murder, fight, nothing.
It's because of all these club closures that the blues parties have begun to revive again. Once more, West Indians in London have nowhere else to go for the kind of Saturday night entertainment that they want. The trouble is, the new generation of blues parties breaks more laws than before. Relations with police are in a worse state than ever, and community workers are genuinely worried that the new wave of parties could end in racial clashes, as white neighbours on council estates where blues parties take place can no longer stand the noise.
If we don't actually get through to the organisers about their responsibilities to the community, then there is no doubt that we could possibly have a complex situation which could just blow up and explode. And what that means, quite bluntly, is that you can push people so far, whether they're black or white, and if in the end they find that they cannot get any redress through lawful means, well, they'll take the law into their hands. And it may well be that people say, well, you know, I've had enough, I'm going to go in there and stop this party. They try and break it up using violence if necessary, which is something to be avoided, but one has got to realise that that is a possible consequence.
It's hard to see what can be done to solve the problem. Young blacks aren't likely to stop breaking the law as long as they feel excluded by white society. But meeting their needs with better jobs, better housing and more facilities is a long-term aim. And in the short term, white society isn't going to turn a blind eye to their law breaking. So it seems that the clashes and violence can only continue.